There's so much more to our funeral directors, to you listening, that is just being a funeral director. And if you don't carve out the time to go do the things that you truly love to do, you are not going to be able to be a good business owner. You're not going to be a good partner or family member. And most importantly, you're not going to be able to serve your client families the way that you want to.
Welcome to FD Talks, the forward-thinking podcast created to help funeral professionals run their business and serve families. Join us as we discover important funeral and death care topics. Gain incredible, dependable, and valuable information to help your business succeed in a rapidly changing environment. Hello, and thanks for joining us for another episode of FD Talks. I'm Rob Davidson, and today we welcome back a guest who might not be a funeral professional, but she certainly knows most of the in and outs of a funeral home. Madison Miller grew up the daughter of a funeral home owner and saw the dedication it takes to serve a community while running a business and raising a family. In 2023, Madison was crowned Miss Ohio and had the opportunity to share her message, 5 Fundamentals of Funeral Directing by a Non-Funeral Director, with many funeral professionals. Madison returns to the podcast to discuss those 5 fundamentals and offers a set of thought-provoking questions to consider as you balance caring for families and caring for yourself. Madison, thanks for coming back on our show for a second time. Can you tell us a little bit about, growing up in the funeral profession? I think I'd like to know what you saw and experienced that's just really stuck with you over the years.
Hi, Rob. It's so good to be back. Thanks for having me again. I am so fortunate. I've grown up my entire life with a funeral director as a dad. And I know when I tell most people that, they're like, ooh, that sounds spooky. But at the end of the day, I got to grow up knowing and learning what empathy and sympathy are through a funeral director's eyes. When I would go downstairs, because at the beginning, we lived above the funeral home. And I know that's a shared experience for a lot of funeral directors who might be generational. So I would go and find any chance to help my dad. I'd be opening doors. I would be bringing family water during visitation. I'd be making cookies and equally stealing another amount of them, or to my dad's dismay, taking them from the freezer. But I had a chance to learn from a young age how to meet people from all walks of life, and oftentimes in their darkest times, which is a skill that I'm so grateful for today. But all of that was learned through the unique perspective of a funeral director's eyes. And I feel like I'm not only a better person because of it, but my outlook on life has completely changed because of it. You know, my dad has always said, you live a life of why nots. We don't know what our time is like here on this planet. You know, it can be taken in a heartbeat, or you can live a long and fruitful life. So you have to make every memory that you possibly can and find those chances to lead whatever fulfilling life you have envisioned for yourself. Not waiting, taking the opportunities when you have them, and experiencing and being present in them at the same time. And it's at the age of 24, it's something I've lived by and share with others now.
So I guess growing up, I'd like to share with us some of the greatest challenges that you saw your parents face, because they were trying to balance serving families, running a business, and spending time with their own families at home.
Yeah, there's so much sacrifice that comes from it that I really feel like funeral directors are afraid to talk about, but it's something that as a kid of a funeral director, I'm not afraid to address, because I think that there's an appreciation I've gained for my dad and my mom because of it. You know, my dad was always on call. To be quite frank with you, funeral directors' schedules suck. You're on call all of the time. I remember being 13 and I was at a piano concert, and it was a competition that I was the youngest one competing at. It was actually on my 13th birthday. And my dad was sitting there, but he was on call. We had just opened our funeral home in 2011, and he was at the age where we didn't really have much of an answering service or other funeral directors on staff to share that night with him. So in the middle of the event, my dad got a call, and he had to leave. And little did we know, or him at the time, that I'd go on to win it. And I would have to tell him over a phone call. And at 13, I was heartbroken that my dad wasn't there to see it. I'm a daddy's girl. My dad and I have always been super close, and I know that gutted him just as much as it gutted me. And I was bummed in the moment. However, I understood from a very, very young age that this is just the life that we lead. My mom even shared with me that I was in kindergarten when we were having Christmas. I have 2 other siblings, so we're all opening gifts. My dad has the video camera out. My mom's guiding us through which gifts from Santa to open next. And Dad got a call. And at the time, I watched my mom just deflate, because my mom works just as hard as my dad in a different field at the time. She was a sales rep for Time Warner Cable, so she was traveling and working an insane 40-hour week. But then when my dad was gone, my mom was there to take care of us to and from school. So you can get the gist. We led a very busy life. So I watched my mom's eyes deflate because the funeral industry never stops. And unfortunately, a lot of people pass on holidays. Someone has to be there, right? So I look at my mom as my dad left and I said, Mommy, it's okay. Someone else needs Daddy more than we do right now. I was a kid. I was in kindergarten and I understood exactly what my dad was running off to do. And even on career day when we were sharing things about our family, my teacher had called my mom and said, well, Maddie just said that her dad's job is getting people ready for heaven. I understood at such a young age that a funeral director isn't somebody who just signs a lot of paperwork, who goes through the motions of their day-to-day and their procedures. They're somebody who are meeting people at the darkest point of their life, often trying to figure out who else to call when they're there with their loved one, meeting them literally at the door while everything is fresh and happening. I understood that other people have needed my dad more than I have in these moments. And I've grown up appreciating that from a young age, although it was a bummer sometimes. But I know that he was going to relieve a part of someone's life in a way that no one else could. And I didn't want them to, because I knew that the care that they were receiving from him was going to be the best.
That's an incredible lesson to learn, especially because he can't let those families down anytime, at any time, can't let them down. And then also just kind of throwing in the aspect of financially maintaining a business, paying the bills and things like that. Are there any memories that you have of any kind of struggles in that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I remember when we opened for the first time, and before that, my parents have always kept us very involved in that process. When my dad was opening the funeral home, we're first generation. Like there's nobody else in our family that has run a funeral home or been around it. My dad was able to do what he did because of people who believed in him, mentors, and people who could guide him in these ways and answer all of his questions. And ironically, we've actually built our funeral home with other first-generation funeral directors that literally walked through the door, which is crazy. But when my dad had made the decision to follow his dream, and with my mom supporting him along the way, he sat all of us down. Again, I'm 11 years old at the time, and I remember so vividly being in the steps in our garage, and my parents are standing there, and we thought someone died because my dad was so nervous, and I couldn't read their faces. And he said, he's like, we are going to take a leap, and we are going to build our own funeral home. And life is going to look, it gets me kind of choked up. Life is going to look very different. Things are going to be tight. We are going to do whatever we can to make this happen for our community. And I remember all of us kids being pumped. I mean, we were amped up because we had no idea the logistics of opening a funeral home. And the really cool part is we never felt that. My parents always kept those tight moments when my dad couldn't pay himself. And when Christmas looked different, we never knew because my parents were finding any opportunity to make sure that we felt no less. And that's, again, going back to what I learned being a funeral director's kid, is life's about moments and memories, and we didn't need the materialistic things to feel those. Although my sister was bummed when she didn't get a unicorn for Christmas, so there was, or a horse, I can't remember. There's a video of that somewhere. But no, times were tight for a lot of years. And I remember all of us on edge every single day, again, at 11 years old, waiting for our first call, and then we got it. Somebody had trusted us for the first time, and my dad went above and beyond. And he doesn't forget them. So it makes all of those struggles worth it. My dad can tell you almost every single family that he's ever served. When we go out, he can put faces to names of, I served their mom last week. 10 years ago, I had to bury his sister. He remembers every single thing because it's an appreciation that during those hardest times financially as a business, we had people trusting us as people first before a funeral director. And we're so grateful for our community for constantly supporting us because we've now expanded to have and build a crematory. We've had the chance to beat our record calls because our community has constantly been there for us and we've been there for them.
That is awesome. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about, as Miss Ohio, you actually presented a continuing education class at the Ohio Funeral Directors Association convention. It was called Indirect Impact. And I know that presentation really resonated with a lot of funeral professionals. Can you give us an idea of what your message focused on and how it relates to funeral professionals?
Yeah, it's almost feels like a letter to my dad in a way, and things that I wish I could have helped him realize when I was growing up. And I know he's going to be listening to this, so hi, Dad. But when I was making it, that's what I was thinking about, is I wish that I could portray to him exactly how I saw him. And I know that other funeral directors had to have been feeling that way, because my dad's always been very open and honest, and my mom too, about the struggles of being in the industry. Like I said, like, the schedules sucked. You have to put your entire life on hold to accommodate your business, to accommodate the next thing that's coming. Whether you're a funeral director, whether you're an embalmer, whether you're an owner, all of these things are happening at the same time, and it's so unpredictable. Therefore, your life is unpredictable. So Indirect Impact is all about recognizing funeral directors as a person first, because the impact that you have most in this life, when I talked about creating a fulfilling life and looking at the end of the day saying, wanting to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. It all starts outside of the arrangement room. I'm sure that funeral directors get compliments on how they arrange funerals, on how they pre-plan, on how they conduct a funeral or conduct a burial. That's great. Good job. You went to school to do that. I really hope you're good at it. But the most impact that funeral directors make are outside of it, how they're interacting in their communities, how they're treating people as people first. I mean, I remember going to family dinner at a restaurant, and somebody would come up to my dad and thank him for serving her family, like last week. We were just at family dinner, and my dad has to now go into work mode. So much of what it takes to be a funeral director happens outside of the arrangement room. And Indirect Impact is all about highlighting the amount of awesome stuff that funeral directors do, license aside, title aside, funeral home aside, as a person first.
You talked about the five, what you call the 5 fundamentals of funeral directing by a non-funeral director. And that's an important clarification to make. I know you've said that before, that you're not a funeral director, but let's talk about those fundamentals and why you created them.
Yeah, so the fundamentals are really trying to flip the funeral industry on its head almost, because it's evolving so much. At least in Ohio, we're seeing a lot less funerals happen in churches. We're seeing a lot less normal burials. We're seeing a lot of direct cremations. So we have to really think about how can we alter the experience for our families, for our clients as a funeral home, and still create that closure of an experience. So I always start Indirect Impact out with talking about growing up as a funeral director's daughter, and I go into what families expect a funeral director's job is versus what you actually do. So I talk about those things. Great, so you don't wake up in the middle of the night, totally, to take a call. You are filling out paperwork, you're going on a burial, you're doing all of these things. But what they actually do is they are waking up in the middle of the night, sometimes multiple times a night, having to turn it on, having to answer the call from a family who's been up for hours grieving. You are trying to customize and adapt every single service. You are seeing traumatic things day in and day out, and coming home, talking to your family and pretending like it didn't happen. There's so much that funeral directors do that the community doesn't realize. So through this, I developed the 5 fundamentals of funeral directing by non-funeral director. And I actually open up Indirect Impact by saying of like, what can a former Miss Ohio teach you about being a funeral director? Actually nothing, because I didn't go to school for this, and I can't tell you the technicalities behind it. My 5 fundamentals are mitigating burnout, because you simply cannot care for yourself or care for your employees if you are giving your employees the best, your client families the best, if you're not caring for yourself. The keys to community building. And to me, those keys are community involvement, trust, and vulnerability. I believe that this is a circle of trust, and that's established through community involvement, through trust, vulnerability, and it's this ongoing cycle and circle. My 4th fundamental is that funeral directors are one-hit wonders, because you have one shot to make this happen. You have one shot to make somebody look peaceful, look restful. You have one shot to have a funeral. You have one shot to make a burial happen. You don't get do-overs. Funeral directors are one-hit wonders. And then the last one is the person-first mentality. This is viewing your client families as people first. This is viewing your employees, your colleagues as people first, and ultimately viewing yourself, separating the funeral director away from the person. Because at the end of the day, that's who you are, even though if it might not feel like it.
Those are interesting observations, because those are the ones I tend to see those. I tend to see those characteristics in funeral directors that are doing it correctly. Why do you think those are so important?
it's the most important because it's not something that's easy to swallow or like easy to do. When I encourage people to have this type of reflection, it's really scary and it's really vulnerable. And it's really easy to push off and to just focus on paperwork and then looking at the next client family and then trying to figure out how to go through the steps, make sure everything's aligned. The funeral industry, although a good funeral director is one that's going to be able to adapt each case and each client and give them something unique to their experience in this journey of closure, which is something I've learned from my dad. I mean, he customizes every playlist. He puts so much thought into exactly what he puts out in the parlor to make sure that this person's funeral feels like them. And that's exhausting. But like I said, when we talk about like a lot of this stuff, nobody wants to talk about it. Like, nobody wants to talk about hard things, but we aren't going to grow as people, as business owners, as employees, if we don't talk about hard things, because this is where you grow.
You've created a list of 4 questions to kind of help funeral directors, just focus on their indirect impact. So let's talk about what those are.
Yeah, so these were things that I developed to, at the end of the day, give them what they want, and it's structure. Funeral directors love structured things. So I knew when I give indirect impact, it's really scary because I hit home for a lot of people. Being a funeral director's kid, most of the funeral industry is generational. Like, it's 4th or 5th, like, I did this, my grandpa did this, so I do it. And it reminds them of all of these memories and things that we really appreciate about funeral directors and what makes them so unique. Like, it's really rare to find somebody who's in this business for other facts and the reason that they're called to it. Like, I have grown up in the funeral director business. I could follow the steps, but it's people who are destined to be in this industry and to do it well are made for it. But after we have these really vulnerable and kind of scary conversations throughout my presentation of indirect impact, going through those fundamentals and connecting on that level, these are the questions I end with. Are you giving your clients what they're asking you for in and outside of the office? You can meet a family, you can give them a service, a burial, and close your transaction. Are you meeting your community, your potential client families with things that they care about? Something that is very valuable in my community in Ohio, where our funeral home is our local animal shelter. We have the last open admission shelter in the state of Ohio, and my community cares a lot about this animal shelter. So my dad, he does it out of the kindness of his heart, but people see him and then see our funeral home attached to him. We are finding chances to raise money. We raise supplies. We are meeting the needs of our community by investing in what they care about. Granted, my dad and my mom are just great people, so they do this out of the kindness of their heart. But like I said, we go out to dinner and people see my dad and they associate us with the funeral home. I grew up with the funeral home logo on the back of my car. Like, people saw me and they were like, "You're one of the Miller girls, you're with the funeral home." So I'm not even in the arrangement room and I'm representing our funeral home outside of it. So you have to really sit back and think to yourself, okay, services aside, are you meeting the needs of your community in and outside of your building? The second question is, are you creating a positive and impactful space for your employees? It is not a secret that the funeral industry is not having a lot of people entering it. There's not a lot of people my age who are going into the industry. So we have to really think about retention. How are we going to keep people here when the schedules suck, when there's an emotional and taxing part of this? We're seeing really traumatic things and we're not taking care of our mental health. There's so much, but there's also so much good. But how can we take care of our employees and take care of your workforce to retain them and ultimately create a better environment for all of you to work? So is that management training? Is that having one-on-ones with your employees and setting goals that are attainable and guiding them to get there? Is it yourself as an owner seeking mentorship from other owners, seeing what they're doing, seeing ways that they can help you meet your needs, finding a different way to go about something or a conversation with somebody who's under you? I think that there's a lot of opportunities for funeral directors to break away from the procedural day-to-day and find chances to better themselves and better their employees. So you have to really think about that. Are you creating a truly positive and impactful space for your employees? My third question is, are you putting yourself first in the process? You have to. My dad, at the end of the day, would have to come home after seeing everything and be a dad. He would have to be cheering for us on the sidelines at volleyball after seeing something traumatic that morning. My mom would even have to find ways to help keep us kids busy while my dad was processing what was happening. And he's very lucky to have the partner in my mom that he does to help be there for him. But regardless if somebody has a supportive partner or supportive crew around them, you have to show up for yourself. I'm somebody who's been in therapy for over 5 years. I don't think anybody's too old for therapy, too young for therapy. If you have nothing to talk about in therapy, according to you, I really believe that anybody who's in or around the death care industry needs to be in therapy or seeking some sort of mental health help. Just point blank. So finding chances to put yourself first in this entire process. But ultimately, and what something I harp on the entire time, is that are you prioritizing yourself as much as you prioritize your clients, your client families? We see funeral directors day in and day out pour every single ounce of their energy, time, and capacity into serving their families. But you cannot keep pouring into your client families if you do not put yourself first, if you do not take care of yourself. Because at the end of the day, like, my dad's the owner and operator of Miller Funeral Home in Ohio. Great, that's awesome. However, he loves to go bass fishing. He just became a grandpa to my nephew. He is my dad, but he loves to go out and play poker and play golf and do all these other things that are far beyond just being a funeral director. And by filling up his cup there, he is able to continue to show up day in and day out for our client families. I love to talk about Terry Herlihy too, for example. She runs a 4th or 5th generation funeral home in Ohio. When I said I was Miss Ohio and I competed at Miss America, Terry, although a funeral director by day, is the producer of Miss Ohio by night. So she's helping provide scholarship opportunities for women like me to go to college. She helps with the animal shelter in her community. She is a mom. She has rescue animals. She even hosts a Christmas tree collection every year for her community to come through because they live across the parking lot from their funeral home. So during Christmas time, their parking lot fills up with people, but it's not for a funeral. It's to walk through their house to see Christmas trees. There's so much more to our funeral directors, to you listening, that is just being a funeral director. And if you don't carve out the time to go do the things that you truly love to do, you are not going to be able to be a good business owner. You're not going to be a good partner or family member. And most importantly, you're not going to be able to serve your client families the way that you want to. So those days off that feel non-existent need to be prioritized. And even those around, the agencies, the people who are in and around the death care industry, this is important for you all too. So Rob and your team, I'm even saying it. When we're all around the death care industry, we have to take care of ourselves to serve our clients better. And it's something that extends beyond just the funeral profession.
Well, and that was probably going to be my last question for you is, you've said some things that I think really would apply to several different, not just funeral service in the funeral profession, but all different walks of life. This is just good, solid advice. What would be some final words and advice that you would have for anybody in any walk of life to be able to use some of these tips and suggestions that you've offered?
I think at the end of the day, we have to understand, recognize, and most importantly, realize that something I've learned from growing up in the death care industry is life is so short. It's so short. And everything I've talked about, putting yourself first, going and making these moments, making memories, trying to find and do the things that you love, and creating and prioritizing time for them, is going to lead to a life well lived. And that's all we could ask for at the end of the day. What do you want in your obituary? What do you want written on your headstone? I know my grandpa's is beautiful. It's now 10 years old this year, and it has a beautiful scene of the river that we spent so many years making memories out of. It has him and his wife. He was a grandpa, a father, a son, a brother. What do you want in your obituary? And I'll meet the funeral directors where they're at. And go live those things. Go find those chances to make an impact on the world beyond your desk, beyond the arrangement room, and create that for yourself. Because you are the only one holding yourself back from that. And the people outside of the death care industry, like, I worked in corporate America and I'm now in the public sector. I was just Miss Ohio, and I felt like everything I learned being a funeral director's kid allowed me to be a good Miss Ohio, because all of these mantras that I've gathered by listening to stories, by resharing them with others, have allowed me to see these things and make sure that I'm present. I'm celebrating every day that we get here because tomorrow's not promised. And at the end of the day, people are never going to remember what we say. The same way I don't expect anybody here to remember what I've made them say, but I hope that people remember how I've made them feel. And all of that's because I met a funeral director.
Madison, I'm certainly going to remember our visit today. Thank you so much for being on the program. I'm going to ask you, can I ask you back sometime?
Absolutely. I would happy to be back. Thank you all for giving space for these types of conversations to be had so funeral directors everywhere can learn from others, but hopefully feel appreciated in the process. So thank you to you and your team for the work and energy that you pour into this to give people the space, platform, and ability to share these stories.
Again, thank you, Madison, for joining us on this podcast and sharing insightful tips that funeral professionals everywhere can use. We hope today's episode helped you consider the importance of caring for yourself just as much as your families, and reminded you that your positive impact as a funeral professional reaches farther than you realize. And remember, the questions Madison shared can profoundly affect you, your funeral home, and the families you serve. So maybe think about those topics as you prepare for the coming year. From all of us here at FD Talks, I'm Rob Davidson. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. If you would like more information about today's topic or previous discussions, please visit us online at funeraldirectorslife.com/FD Talks. There you can find information about this podcast and submit any comments, suggestions, or feedback about our series. We also welcome your ideas for future episodes. Listen to FD Talks wherever you get your podcasts.